Welcome. Today we're joined with Giovanni, co-founder of Lifeblood Capital. Giovanni is a true visionary in the field of finance and startup development with a wealth of knowledge and experience under his belt. Not only is Giovanni academically accomplished, but he also has a wealth of practical experience, having traveled to 40 plus countries, assisting 500 startups with team building and fundraising strategies, leading to $3 billion in acquisition. We have a lot that we get into in this episode. We talk about the looming recession, recruiting, hiring, and a variety of different topics. Check the chapters below and the timestamps if you want to get a sense of what's going to be happening. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. We are working to put out 2 to 3 new episodes a week, and every bit helps. Let's stay curious, learn about Giovanni, his work at Lifeblood Capital, and more in this episode of the Learning With Lowell show. All right, so there's been all these mass layoffs. I think 10,000 from Amazon, 4,000 from Twitter, like a lot of stuff in the tech sector. How is this? Is similar shakeups happening as people are concerned about recessions or whatever in the MedTech space? Have you seen anything like that happening?
So I always have to bifurcate it out, the worlds that I play in when I look at MedTech. So you still have the corporate world, right? You have the Medtronics, the Boston Scientifics, the Johnson & Johnsons of the world. And then you have the startup cultures and the 5-person companies, the 15-person companies, the going upwards of 50 to 100-person companies. There has been some layoffs that we've heard of on the corporate side. But overall, I think there's been more of a steady hold on the startup side. And it's either a steady hold or a fairly healthy growth effort. There hasn't been a bunch of startups that have consistently laid off. I mean, when we heard back in March of 2020 through June of 2020, where it didn't matter if you were small, medium, or large, people were just getting cut left and right. That's not what's happening now, especially, and I can only speak to MedTech. There have been layoffs going on in the corporate world, but my world in terms of major activity day in, day out is in the small to medium-sized company world. And that has been at either a cool holding standpoint or it has been moderate growth. I think the days of back half of 2020 and for the most part all of 2021, this white noise fire of growth, and it's fairly reflective of how we saw the stock market grow / pull back. There's a somewhat emulation of that going on, but I think overall MedTech hasn't been too bad.
Okay. Do you think part of it is like they tend to, I imagine a lot of people just did a lot of raises, so maybe it's the fact that they have like 18-month runways. Because I think like Y Combinator, for instance, is saying like most people should try and get things situated so that they're revenue positive sooner. But MedTech is usually a longer term play inevitably. So they already have money for a longer period of time than I think the average recession is about 18 months to 22 months or something like that. So they already potentially have. I'm just curious, like what do you think are the factors that are coming in to allow MedTech to be a little bit more insulated and can keep pushing forward to develop the things they want to be developing?
Once again, sticking on the small to medium-sized companies, I mean, there are companies right now who are struggling if they need cash. I've heard of startups have to close their doors if they needed cash to raise, and the raising period of time was a little bit more challenging. So that is something that we have to be aware of. However, medical device investors, as well as medical device startups themselves, I mean, when I say medical device, and let's just use MedTech, it means regulated hardware and or software technologies. So let's just stay in that regulated field for a moment. Nothing direct to consumer or anything like that. So if we're in a regulated industry, you're talking about time to get either FDA clearance or approval on the class 3 devices, which can take upwards of 5 to 10 years. I mean, there's plenty of companies that I know that still don't have regulatory approval, and they're 7 years old or coming up on 10 years old. And there's obviously reasons for that. I'm sure that they could share with you. But when you go into a fairly healthy startup company in MedTech, you're talking about a minimum of 3 years to revenue generation, and if that's a 510K, right? And if they can get that done quickly, and I've heard some amazing stories of people being able to move swiftly. Typically speaking, you're talking about a 4 to 7 year ride, and I'm overly generalizing amongst MedTech. So when you're talking about those kind of development periods until commercialization or regulatory approval or clearance, you're talking about, and once again, assumptively, that these companies are being financed by venture capital firms. The venture capital firms have limited partners, and more often than not, these are 10-year horizon firms, right? So they raise a fund, they have to deploy the capital usually within the first 3 to 4 years, and then they're supposed to be able to return that fund within 10 years to their LPs. There's always circumstances that can change what I just said on a minimal basis, but that's in essence what we're talking about. So if that's the case, and you mentioned 18 months to 24 months as the typical recession, how many recessions can we get through in a 10-year fund, right? So once the fund closes, there's a fiduciary responsibility to deploy that capital by the venture capitalists from the LPs, or for the LPs rather, I should say, limited partners. So once the fund exists, they have to deploy the capital, independent of whether we're in the height of a recession or not, in the greatest of times, and not a recession. So when the money is available, I mean, we're hearing that a lot right now. When we're in a depression, we're in a recession, whatever it may be, money is available. Let's just get that super clear. Money's being deployed. A very good friend of mine who's a venture capitalist said it very well, who gave me some great insight. There's a lot of internal rounds going on right now that will never make it to the press. So in 2020 and 2021, when you heard all these press releases about this company raised money, that company raised money, this company raised, and that has quieted down a bit. It's because there's a lot of internal rounds going on in this uncertain period that the venture capitalists are assessing. Do I put more money into the companies that I'm already investing in? Do I hold off for 6 months and wait to have this cool down a bit and then make more investments once things get better? Those two strategies, let's talk about that real quick. You won't hear about the money that's being deployed right now, typically speaking, if it's not new money, if it's internal round money. So that's one thing, and money is moving. The other thing is, if there's a fiduciary responsibility by the venture capitalist to return the capital to a limited partner or multiple limited partners over a 10-year horizon, and they hold off 6 months because it's a cool-off period, and they want to assess what's going on. That's 6 months that they're losing that they aren't deploying capital, which then squeezes their timeline of the time that they actually do have to deploy capital. So if they're waiting if we haven't seen a lot of investments being made in the past 6 months, well, all that's doing is taking that 3 to 4 years and shrinking it by an extra 6 months of them having to deploy that capital. So maybe they have to make 2 investments or 3 investments in 6 months moving forward, which is somewhat of the speculation as to why things might seem a little brighter or look a little better in 2023, when there might be more money activity, more press releases, more new investments being made. So I'm trying to get to your answer and come to a clear conclusion where MedTech is not as susceptible to knee-jerk reactions on what happens on the front of New York Times when we're in a recession or a depression, because the development life cycles outlast your 24-month average or 18-month average of a recession. They're longer than that. So they might have to endure 1, 2, maybe even 3 depressions, pullbacks, or recessions in the life cycle of a medical device, number one, coupled with the fact that realistically, the recessions are independent of the venture capital funds themselves because they usually run on 10-year horizons. Once again, how many recessions, depressions, or pullbacks can exist in 10 years? So I don't want to say that's what makes MedTech resistant. It just makes it less susceptible to knee-jerk reactions based on economics.
That makes a lot of sense. It's especially with those horizons in mind. I think anyone listening would understand that a little bit more. So a big component outside of helping people raise money is that you do recruiting and hiring and helping people understand that piece of it. A lot of people read or hear that they should be moving through jobs over the course of like a couple of years, like every 2 years, if you're like a job person versus like a founder person. How does that work in your field? Do you see people going the whole gamut from like day one? And this is like, we're talking like averages. I'm sure there's some people that will, some people that won't. But traditionally, when you find someone a place to work at, that matches what they want to be working at, how long do they stay there?
How long do they stay there versus how long should they stay there are two different questions, I would say. 2 years, you have to ask the question of what did you or what could you accomplish in 2 years within a medical device company? When everyone gets onboarded, right? I mean, for the first 3 months, let's call that a wash, right? Everyone's learning each other's names. You're learning where the bathrooms are, all that kind of good stuff. 3 months is just kind of getting up and running type stuff. 6 months, you're getting a little bit warm. You're doing some stuff. You're falling into a groove. After the first year, you feel like you've been at the company. You know everyone's name. You're slowly starting to build relationships with your peers, et cetera. But a year goes by pretty quickly. Then you have one more year to make two. When you're talking about designing, scaling, or commercializing medical devices, and we talked about those timelines of development, let's just say you're an engineer. Well, if you're at a company for 2 years and you have another how many years before it gets cleared or approved to even see if it gets that far? Well, you haven't even stuck around for most of the story. I don't have to say that everyone should stick around for the full life cycle. I mean, most oftentimes it's not even possible for a lot of the crazy reasons that we can think of, right? Where there's layoffs or there's changes or whatever it may be. However, jumping every 2 years, you have to ask yourself the question, what could you truthfully accomplish or impact into a company in 2 years? I have seen people be hired at the right time for very acute, identifiable projects that are high value for the life of a company that may only take 18 months or a year or 2 years. And they are such an execution artist that they were at the right place at the right time and they were the right profile, having the right skill sets to come in and execute what they're supposed to be doing. And then they made this massive impact to the company, which literally brought it to the next milestone or level of which it needs to grow, or even got approved or commercialized, or even an acquisition, whatever it may be. But for the most part, when you're talking about career development, if me as a recruiter or me as a potential employer, if I looked at somebody who has 10 years of employment and they've had 5 jobs and they literally move every 2 years, and have a position on my team that is not an acute project that they're going to come in, make a huge dent, and then I don't care if they're here after 2 years or not anymore, but I really do need them to build themselves into the fabric of the culture, help lead a team, whatever it may be. Do I want somebody who I have a high likelihood based on the statistical history of them moving every 2 years, joining my team when I would love them to stay for 5 years or more? No. So it's circumstantial, obviously, in terms of really what the need is of the company and the project, et cetera. However, if you're talking about in an objective vacuum, building your career, you shouldn't be looking every 2 years to make a move. I would say maybe 3 to 4 is certainly healthy. 5 is excellent. And then you start getting into stereotypes and even recruiter stereotypes. When I see someone who's been at a company for 10 years and they send me their resume, the likelihood of me being able to pull them out of that, I mean, there's always different circumstances, but when someone's been in a fabric of a company, culture of a company for 10 years, usually they're going to make and there's no reason for them to move, like they're organically looking outside, they're not under pressure because the company's folding or whatever have you. The reason for them to leave all the relationships and the human connections that they've made and the peers that they've worked alongside with for a decade, it has to be almost the perfect opportunity for them to leave that. So there becomes this tipping point where if you're going to put a gun to my head and say, what are really the window of time that you should be staying at a company to stay healthy, meaning for your career growth, but also what you can actually see through in terms of life cycles of skill sets that you're learning and being able to tell a story of what you can impact a company with, it's between 4 and 7 years. Anything under 4 years, you always have to understand why. There's usually circumstances. And anything over 7 years, you really have to prod and test if they're really willing to make a move.
Makes sense. So I know a number of people in biotech, MedTech, and I always hear this comment that like 3 months is just like, getting your feet wet. But at the same time, I've seen people who can change that to get people working much faster. Are there, in your experience, are there structural, or like why would it take like 3 months just for people to get, like, this is something that like everyone's heard, like for the first 3 months you're just getting to know people, maybe even longer than that, just to get your feet where it needs to be. But with the right support from like the team, onboarding, and all these other things, like most places that I've given these suggestions to, they usually can get people working much faster than that. So I'm curious, like, what, just like following with that rhythm keeps people from, if you're advising and working for an entrepreneur or the C-suite people who are trying to build out their team, like I imagine they don't want 3 months. They would rather people working as best as they can as soon as possible. How do you get them as soon as possible then? Or do you just let them know like these are like rough rules, okay? I'm not thinking that, it's like, all right, at 3 months, then you can start expecting, production or something. But I do hear that a lot. And I always just, as someone who literally spends their lives, finding people, finding them a home, and knowing if you did a good job, 3 to 6 months to know if you did a right fit, is it probably like kind of like frustrating for you or the applicant as well?
It's not necessarily dependent on the individual being able to work or not. If you're hiring a professional, especially an experienced professional, it's not that they can't immediately make an impact or difference and have that transferable skill set be put to work even day one. What I really mean by that 3-month period of warming up, it's everything external of the individual. If there's peers in the team, how quickly can you trust those people? Do you know what they're capable of? How do you overlap your skill sets with their skill sets and tackle problems together? Building those relationships so that you can do things as a union with people who you just joined the team with, who you didn't know prior to this company. And then understanding the technology itself. I mean, even if it's I love heart valves. Transcatheter heart valves is my thing, alongside neuromodulation, surgical robotics. I mean, I love MedTech overall, but I strongly built my career on the startups that came up with the transcatheter heart valves. And so even amongst them, when you're going from a transcatheter mitral valve repair system to a transcatheter mitral valve replacement system, the anatomy of what you're looking at is the same anatomy, but the technology is different. The story is different that you're telling the physicians. The story may be different that you have to write on all the documentation that you're going to submit to the FDA. The information that you have to share with the potential patients that you're recruiting for a clinical trial. So it's, to answer your question, the 3 months comes in from not necessarily the individual being held back on their ability to make an impact day one. It's their ability to move as a union with the team that's already in place that they're joining so that they can build those human relationships and also simultaneously feel comfortable telling the story of the technology that they're working on. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Learning the nuances of the industry that they're partaking in. If there's 17 mitral valve replacement companies, well, what are the other ones doing? Why is our company the best? What are we doing differently that the other ones aren't? How am I relaying that story to the outside world when I have to interact with them? Right? So it's storytelling based on the actual technology that you have to absorb and understand how to make an impact on, and everything that you have to learn in order to do so. And then it's obviously the human relationships that you're developing on the team that was already there before you got there. That's really where that first 3 months of trying to shake off the dust comes in, not necessarily someone just sitting off in the corner waiting for someone to tell them to do something.
Yeah, it makes sense. When it comes to the recruiting process, where do you come in? Do you do like A to Z, or does the company do like, the first phase of hiring and then you come in the last couple, like how do you fit into the hiring process? Do you take care of like if I'm hiring and I'm looking for, director of X, do you come in and do the whole thing? I mean, do you selectively do a component of the technical hiring? Like how do you fit into it? to the ecosystem of just hiring people?
We do the whole thing to make it a super simple answer.
Hmm.
We work only with MedTech startups. Once again, MedTech being regulated hardware and or software. Startups, anything from a technology turning into a company spinning out of an incubator, all the way through multinational commercialization, especially, well, certainly they're privately held if they haven't gone public or got acquired yet, and they're doing an initial commercial test, if you will. That's later stage for us because they're already in commercial stages for sure, but we've put together numerous marketing teams, commercial teams, et cetera, for privately held companies. However, there's more startup companies that are in that R&D, early stage clinical quality regulatory phase than there are commercial, because there's a lot of startups who ultimately fail that don't even get FDA clearance or approval to go commercialize. So, there's this funnel that goes upward, right? So there's a lot more startups. There's a lot more startups on the bottom that are building themselves, and as you go up to this cone shape, there's less and less and less because of the failures that exist for a multitude of reasons. But there's fewer that are approved and commercialized versus the plethora of innovation that's being developed. So we work in only MedTech startups. What our job is, on a much more consultative basis, is to be basically the best friend of the executive team, or even singularly the CEO, on helping them not only simply recruit, but design their team. Oftentimes startups come to us and they don't come to us with a position description. They don't come to us and say, this is the title that we need, and this is the profile that we know that we need. Go out and get us candidates for that. Does that happen? Sure. Yeah, that's more transactional, cut and dry, just go off and do it. A lot of times we work with startups and saying, okay, what is going on in your company right now? Where are the major gaps? What are the 4 or 5 of you in the company, or the 10 of you, doing right now that if you hired the 11th or the 6th person to be dedicated to that, it frees up a bunch more time and space for everyone to do their retrospective or their focused specialties, right? So, like, what is the gap analysis that's going on in the team right now that you should be hiring? Is it putting in a quality system and then finally hiring a quality manager because you don't have someone right now, and the R&D team's kind of taking that over with the head of ops? I don't know, I'm making it up. But what we do is we go through that whole consultative process, identify and talk about market landscape and what candidates are doing in certain styles of profiles that could fit that. And then we work directly with the startups on creating that position description. And then once we're all good to go, that's on us to go out and recruit that through a very transparent storytelling process, very media-rich process. The one thing that I think is changing drastically, and if it hasn't fully changed, which I know it hasn't fully changed, but definitely should, is the old days of recruiting that were so obtuse and not transparent, where it's a recruiter calling somebody out of the blue and saying, I have a great position that I think you'll be highly interested in, and it's right down the street from you, and I would love to share more information with you. Do you have 30 seconds? And the answer today in 2022 is, hell no, I don't have 30 seconds for that, because life is busy. I have an iPhone in my hand. I have the world at my fingertips of information. And I have a lot going on in my life right now. And the fact is that you said so much without saying anything at all. I don't have time for you. So we are very fragmented in our time these days. When you go out and you storytell in a position, the more that you can give transparently and drop something in somebody's lap that they can choose to read on their iPhone while they're in the bathroom, or when they put their kids to sleep and they finally have 15 minutes to look through an email or read an article or watch a technology video clip, or on their way to work when they're at the red light and they can quickly read the title of the email that you just sent them that actually tells the name of the company and what their position title is. That's today, and that's how we work. And we work very, very transparently, which is why we have fairly strict our agreements with our clients, and we are an exclusive recruitment firm. So once we do take on a position with our clients, we are exclusive and we are full-blown partners with them. We are an extension of that MedTech startup in the field, where it's our responsibility to go out and aggregate obviously appropriate profiles and candidates and only present those to our clients. But it's a lot of very transparent storytelling and good storytelling to engage currently employed, likely more often than not, candidates to pick their head up when they don't have to and say, wow, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more based on all the information that you share with me. That's what we do. And that's what we do for startups. And if you visit our website, lifebloodcapital.com, we even have a link that is called philosophy. And our philosophy is literally, we are hired as a protection of a brand. When we are in as an extension of a medtech startup out in the field, and we are utilizing your name, and we are utilizing the ability to tell your story that you have created over a multitude of years, to be able to go out and attract strangers and engage them in your story. That is a huge responsibility, because if you're not a good storyteller, if you're not a good recruiter, if you're not capable of gaining attention by the necessary people, all that you're doing is bruising the brand of the startup company that's entrusted in you to go out into the field. And that's a huge responsibility that we take seriously. So just to be super clear on that, why we take on this responsibility and how and where we come into the process is the reason why we take on the full process, and we offer white glove service to our startup companies, is because it's a responsibility. We don't just come in and just only do part of it and just toss it over to the side and say, hey, pay our fee, but the rest is on you. It's a responsibility, and hiring people is a burden until it becomes such a burden that it chokes out a startup and actually hurts the operational functionality. Typically speaking, more often than not, companies are not proactive in their hiring practices. It's unfortunate, but the ones that are proactive usually end up getting the best talent.
Yeah. And so I agree with everything you said there. I was once on a hiring team, and the person was in the last interview. There was like 4 or 5 rounds, and they were like, so we're like, it was with me, the last one, and it was like, so what questions do you have? Because I always like to ask questions to people. I don't like it when people just sit there and be bombarded of me. And they're like, so what is this company about? I was like, and I was like, you know what? And I like pull up all the information that they had on at the time online. It's like, there's no way you could have known this. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's 100%. Like, thank you for asking. Like, what, you know, here's the answer. What kept you like staying around for so long? Like, you're such a nice friend, you know. And that was an interesting thing to correct, because I think sometimes a lot of startup founders, either especially the technical ones, they don't understand, like, if you just have like the build it and they will come mentality, no one's going to come. Or the people who are going to come, it's like, why would they pick you if they don't understand what you're about? Like, you want people to really know what you're about. And at the same time, I'm curious. So since you're doing the whole thing, I've had people who I've been interviewing where they had like a earphone in, where someone was feeding them the answers. And I laughed because it's just like, at the time, like, there was like one other person on the call, and we were just like messaging each other, like, is this what's happening? We started asking like really simple questions that if you knew that, like what color is the sky? Like, you don't have to really have a thought about blue. I'm just curious, like, when you're going through and you're talking to all these people, how do you like, you know, differentiate the people who know their stuff versus not know their stuff? I'm kind of curious, like, some of the stories behind the tactics you use. And I think even previously we were talking, and I made a comment that at a certain point I get tired of hearing people just say they want to change the world. It's like, oh, I want to save these millions of lives. And it's like, okay, now tell me what you really care about. So I'm curious, like, how do you cut through the fat, get right to the meat of knowing, you know, who these people are, what are they about? And I'm curious if you could like kind of share some stories that taught you those lessons. Like, I learned things from like someone saying like, hey, I don't know what your company's about at Round 5. I learned things from people showing up and getting like things fed to them in terms of like how we ask questions to identify that sooner. So a big question there, but yeah, if you could just kind of share some of your stories, some of your lessons, and at the same time, how you cut through it.
Transparency. That's the direct answer that you're looking for, and I'll dig into the details on that. So in the messaging and the stories that we carry out there, I mean, we start with putting together our messaging. Once again, very media rich, talking about who they're reporting to, telling the peers that they'll have, putting in the LinkedIn profile, showing the technology videos, sharing the press releases that are publicly available, and then crafting the story that we can only get from the CEO, and obviously get approval for sharing this information. So we don't share anything that's confidential. It's all approved, but very transparent details about, by the time you're done reading this, and if you want to take advantage of all the media that we're sharing with you, and you really should have, I'll be overly conservative and say about 85% of your questions answered. And then that last 15% should obviously manifest itself throughout the interview process when you're interacting with the human beings involved in the hiring process. Throughout that overly transparent messaging, the candidates that we get back or start engaging with, those are the ones that decided that based on everything that we shared with them, it made sense for them to pursue this. They are interested, they are qualified. We make it so binary. And one of the tactics that, I'm giving away trade secrets here, not that it's mind-blowing, but it's something that drastically helps me. When I'm taking on a position with a company, one of my phases of taking in information from them that make this process so black and white is, after we take in all this bigger picture story, I say, what are the 5 questions that if you asked them in an interview process and they were binary, they either had the experience or they didn't have the experience, what 5 questions would you design and share with me? Meaning, these aren't soft questions like, do you play well with others in the sandbox, right? Are you a good team player? Yes, I'm a good team player. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Our company needs to build a quality system from scratch. Have you ever built a quality system from scratch? Yes or no? If it's no, you aren't a candidate. If it's yes, now I have 4 more questions. And if they're all yes, I get to present you to my client, because I know that no matter what, these 5 binary yes or no responses are the fundamental drivers to being an appropriate candidate. Maybe, and I'll ask permission on this with my client up front, if I get a 4 out of 5 and they're a rock star personality, then let's do it. But I ask my client before we even start and kick off, like, what are these binary filters that don't waste their time, don't waste your time, so that we can present only appropriate qualified candidates?
Yeah, so that makes sense. And in a perfect world where everyone just said the truth wherever they went, I think that work 100% of the time. How do you know, like, so you say, Lowell, have you ever built a neuro modulation machine? I was like, yes. So then how do you go down and figure out that I'm clearly full of shit? I've never done this. So how do you qualify the yes?
Yeah, I think the answer that or the question that you're really trying to ask is, how am I able to validate the BS that people are telling me? The one thing I will tell you is the medical device industry is fortunately a very highly educated industry. It's as best as it can be, obviously there's always exceptions here. It's a fairly ethical, compliant, regulated industry that just bodes for educated, professional human beings. There's a lot of exception. I promise you that I've run into them myself. But for the most part, I don't really have to deal with shadiness of asking, hey, have you built a quality system for a medical device company before? Yes, I have. And it's a complete blatant lie. Because then you say, okay, well, give me a few examples, et cetera. And then they start running down and start talking about them. But this is, has it happened to me where I've had someone blatantly lie to me? Yes. It's like, it's a great way of thinking about it. Laws that are implemented by a government cannot protect people from breaking the laws. Mm-hmm. Right? Just because a law exists doesn't mean a human being is not going to break the law. it just puts in guidelines for creating a civilized environment, right? It doesn't stop people from doing things. I mean, obviously we have law enforcement to enforce the law, but just simply by the sheer fact that laws exist does not stop people from breaking laws. So when you talk about ethics or morals of, have you built a quality system for a medical device startup company before? And someone looks at me steady-handedly and can pass a lie detector test and say, yes, I have, and they simply haven't, even though it's on their resume, et cetera. I mean, there's 15 hoops we have to jump through in an interview process. And even what are they going to do? Pepper their references that they give me at the very back end when I call Dr. John Smith or, PhD Susie Q, and I say, hey, has John ever really done a quality system before? And they're like, oh, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of work to do that much lying. Is someone going to really go through all that effort?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not possible, but I'm just saying, in theory and at a high level, the medical device industry typically doesn't bode that kind of culture.
Yeah. I was once interviewing a person for a CTO position, and they had tons of experience, but within like 10 minutes of the call, you could tell that they were not qualified, even though like everything on paper was right, even their references were saying it was right. I know many people that'll say, hey, Lowell, can you be my reference and say I did X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, no, you didn't do X, Y, and Z for me. But that's a me thing. I know they'll find someone else, give them a fake title or something. Like I think if people want to get their foot in the door and find an opportunity, I think a lot of people will do that, or they'll just BS their way in. So then when you're qualifying through people and you send them on, how many people are you sending on? And then how often do people not stay? Do you gather data on what happens to people after they've been sent on by you and then hired and then stay for a period of time?
Yeah, of course we do. Our goal, one of our KPIs or metrics that we can sell as a recruitment firm and saying, hey, look at us, this is what we're able to accomplish, is mitigating offer turn downs, right? So we have a number of like, how often does an offer get turned down? We've designed an interview process, once again, working off of transparency, that in theory, it should mitigate the offer to be turned down, because at the very back end, we've worked so closely with the candidate of really what they want and the client of really what they can offer, and trying to marrying these 2 points to make sure that by the time we actually extend an offer, it shouldn't be a huge surprise, and thus mitigating an offer turn down. That's one thing. Running and designing a thorough interview process, not just 1 or 2 video calls. You meet in person at the office for a half hour with only 2 or 3 people, when realistically this person's going to be interacting with a team of 20. And then you send an offer, and that's in that process. I mean, there's not that many touch points. Thus, you're leaving yourself susceptible to a lot of unknowns, and then anything can happen. When we start talking about designing processes where our candidates are having multiple touch points with probably anywhere between the top 2 to 5 people that they're either going to be reporting into or indirectly reporting into and working very closely with. And then they decide if they're going to bring that person on to meet. And then they decide if that person's going to come on and do an interview panel, maybe even with a presentation that they're given information ahead of time to be able to put a presentation on. And then we're going to do reference checks. And then there's probably going to be a couple more calls, maybe even with board members afterward, once we've got that far. There's a lot of hoops that have to jump out that we just call testing points, where it either allows the person to fail because they're supposed to fail, or it allows them to pull out because they don't want to keep on interviewing and investing their time because they're ultimately not fully committed to that one particular position. And maybe they have 7 things going on and they figure that one of them else is just going to work because they just want a job rather than a position. So there's a lot that goes into mitigating the risk of someone being terminated or fired, in addition to our points of contact with them and the information that we feed our clients that they're not getting from even their interactions, that are a lot of hoops that the candidate still has to jump through. So the touch points, the amount of touch points that exist throughout an interview process truly do matter to get the best picture, to help mitigate someone from not being the right person after they're onboarded? Once again, can you create a perfect world that you're gonna not find, you're gonna learn everything before someone joins and have no boogeymen come out later on? No, it's impossible. But that's why you design thorough interview processes and treat them seriously.
That makes sense. So we're coming to the end of 2022. How many people have you placed, and then how many have stayed? As like a percentage.
Great question. So this year, coming up probably close to 100 hires now. I mean, we have another handful or two of ongoing projects that are happening that hopefully we'll see what the next month brings before January 1st rings in the new year. But roughly around 100 plus. Out of that 100 plus, we like to keep our mitigation down from sub 5% of things that are truly not working out. I mean, once again, that you're never going to have a perfect track record because humans are humans. I mean, I'll tell you, I actually recently had a call with a client of mine that we hired, a VP of clinical affairs. It was a very methodical process. The candidate said all of the right things, and it was actually a very flexible startup process where it involved a lot of trust from both sides, for her to walk away from the other opportunities that she was involved in, and also the client side of having to deal with the FDA in certain timelines. It was a very, very collaborative process to bring this person on, and a lot of touch points. And in theory, it should have been the perfect hire, because we made another hire for that same company 2 months prior to that, and they're still saying it's one of the best hires they've ever made. However, this particular person, and it was a VP level. I mean, this was an executive level. Some of the most bizarre human behavior just started manifesting after 2 or 3 months of being on board, and you just don't know why. And it didn't have to be like that. And it's things that you can't control when you're even in an interview process months prior to that. And so all of a sudden, this person then just simply disappeared. And the company had no recourse or even ability to communicate with this person because they weren't answering text messages or calls anymore. And this is a VP level person that has fairly recently joined their company. And she disappears, and the company had to then go back and talk with their legal counsel and say, what can we do at this point? There's not even an engagement going on. And just for legal purposes and timestamp purposes, the only thing that they could do was simply write an email and a text message to the best known numbers and contact information that they had for this person, and simply say at this point their employment is terminated and we're no longer needing your services. And there was no response even to the email. So they never know what happened with that person. They don't know what happened to that person. And this is an executive level person that jumped through countless touch points in an interview process. And that is an anomaly that to this day I can't explain. And I've known the candidate. I talked to her very clearly. We spent a lot of time negotiating and working through things together. She was very compliant, a professional, and also both sides, by the time everything was done, was incredibly excited to have this work out. And then to have it end like that was just beyond unexpected. And there was nothing that even a background check or anything could do. That was just real time magic / witchcraft.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they were like kidnapped or something. Are we sure they're alive? Like, that's
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. There's like, if it was in Florida, then I'm even more suspicious because you have gators and stuff that'll eat people.
Yeah,
like you have boa constrictors now.
No, yeah, we do have boa constrictors, but this was not in Florida.
Okay, all right, then hopefully wherever that person is, they're surrounded by love and are doing something they enjoy. Though they should probably let you guys know what happened, so I can do a better job. It kind of leads me to a related question. I think that maybe this will probably the last one on recruiting and hiring. So people come in the MedTech space. I'm familiar with the more of like a fire fast if you have to fire someone. If you can coach them, get them better, you should. But what are some of the rules of thumbs that you suggest the entrepreneurs and C-suites that you work with use in terms of like it's not going to work out, however the time horizon is for figuring that out? In this case, like a couple months, and this person more terminated themselves. What are some of the litmus tests that you suggest for entrepreneurs in the medtech space to know when it is time to pull the trigger, and then how should they handle it? Because there's like a lot of subjectivity in terms of like, I've seen people keep people around for years and they're like, oh, we should get rid of them, and they're like, it's not good for the person. Like the person wants to go do something good if they can't do good there. So I'm curious, like, how do you handle that side of it? Or is it like, I guess it's not necessarily a factor in what you help people with, but I'm just curious about your thoughts on it in general.
So you said a word, subjectivity, which, you can also say it depends, right? And I hate using that because you're looking for answers here and guidance. And I would say there's a blend of patience and documented metrics and notes that you can blend together, right? So, I had a client of mine who almost utilized our services for a position, and now they are, but almost used our services for a position to start out with something. And then as we were about to engage, they said, hey, listen, we just found a candidate. We want to run with this candidate. If anything happens, we'll circle back around. I said, absolutely no problem. They ended up finding the candidate. The candidate started, right? So they did this process all on their own. And this was a medical director. This is like a serious position. And this person started and chose to quit on the Friday of the first week. So for me, that is, I don't know, a bag of red flags, not one red flag, a bag of red flags. First and foremost, there's incredibly little patience for the person to understand if anything can be rectified or worked through or discussed. Making a career decision, which is arguably the biggest decision, right? Besides marriage and spending the rest of your life with somebody, when you take on a position that pays your bills, that's bigger than buying the car, buying the house, because your career, which pays you, enables you to buy your house and pay for the car. So it's a huge career decision. And to be able to quit after 1 week, it's a severe lack of patience or a severe inefficient interview process. Like, we're literally almost nothing was talked about in the interview process, and something was self-declared during the first week that was so ridiculous that someone couldn't stay on board anymore. So that's a very extreme example. So when I say patience and metrics and notes, when it comes to the company assessing an employee and deciding on whether or not they want to keep someone on board, you have to ask the question, how long has it been going on for? If they've been really upset, or it hasn't worked out, or they just haven't been performing as much as they think they should be performing for months or years, that's a problem, right? That's where specific transparency, radical candor, to be able to sit down and have live conversations eye to eye with the person and saying, this is how we are seeing things. Let us know if anything's going on specifically that we should be empathetic towards, or understand that you're going through, that maybe be causing some of this behavior. However, if not, please provide any feedback that you have for us, in case we can give you more resources to be more successful in your position. And for the most part, over the next 3 to 6 months, we are going to be putting in these metrics that we're going to be guiding you towards and making sure that you're staying on course. And now that we've established these, it's on you to communicate back and forth. And if you're not getting the resources to do so, and certainly to hit these milestones or these goals, if you don't have any further feedback, we're assuming that you're going to hit these. And if you don't hit these, then we're going to have to think about, is this the right place for you, right? To go in there and make a knee-jerk reaction and fire somebody because they did one thing wrong when they're a crucial position or whatever, I don't think that's the right move. I think if someone has been a absolute sore or a pain in the side or a thorn for years, someone needs to just have the gall to come in and have a direct conversation and say what's going on. Firing somebody without any communication whatsoever is also incredibly wrong. You have no idea what's going on with the other person. I'm not looking to make excuses for people. That's why communication and transparency is so important. But when it comes down to making sure that someone as an employee has to be assessed on either staying or leaving and involving patience and note-taking, if someone's not performing to their optimal capability or at least expectations, you have to put in metrics and goals for them to adhere to. And then if they're not adhering to them after especially communication and transparency has been given to that person on these are the goals that you need to be hitting and they don't hit them, then you have something to point back to and say, this is why it's not working out, but you're gone. Like that's how you got to do it. You got to do it properly and methodically. Making emotional knee-jerk reactions is not the way to run a business or be a leader.
That makes sense. So just touching back on one thing you said about the one lady, and then I think we're probably going to talk about Stoicism, but with the remaining time, when you see someone who leaves so early, do you ever take a step back and think, what if it's the company? What if like they came in and the company was just egregious in a way that they are very sensitive to, and then you use that as an opportunity to better understand the client, if that's even a client you want? Is that ever a part of your thought process in terms of like if something doesn't work like so egregiously like that, where someone leaves on the first Friday? I mean, there are some places when I used to work for people where I'd know in the first 10 seconds it wasn't going to work out, and then it's just how you can navigate that moving forward. Like some people, some really pretty bad things could happen in the first week that make them want to leave. Do you ever use that as just an assessment tool to better understand if the client maybe is a secret jerk or something like that?
The answer is yes. So the wonderful part about being a consulting firm at the end of the day is you get to choose who you want to work with. We don't have to sign everybody and take everyone's business. And I'm glad to be able to say that. We know that it takes two sides to come up with the right answer and potentially only one side to come up with the super wrong answer. And sometimes both are wrong. But we've have a lot of experience and a lot of stories of companies that it's the executive leadership as a whole. It's the philosophy of the owner. It's the culture that's just completely toxic or wrong. And anyone in their right mind should not want to think about that place being a step in the resume because it's just not the right place to be. Yeah. So there are plenty of companies that I purposely will choose not to work with because I either heard through the grapevine, heard directly, experienced it through my own interactions with the company and how they run business. And that's the beauty of formulating partnerships with companies, being a consultant, because partnerships are everything, right? Going back to the communication and transparency. And if that's not there, and someone's just treating you inappropriately or just, not as a partner, or they simply are not nice. I mean, it just, time is too limited. And so if a company's bad, if the culture's not right, don't work with them. Don't go there.
Yeah. And I think anything we've talked about thus far in terms of how to assess a candidate could easily be applied to anyone listening who is looking for a place out there. Look for transparency, look for touch points, and just, pay attention. We're looking at it from the lens of the company, but I think that everything we talked about today could be easily applicable to anyone who's looking for a job as well. I know you're a big fan of Stoicism, and so am I. And I'm actually staring at my copy of the like a beat up copy of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So I'm just curious, what do you pull from that book? Like in terms of your daily life? Like sometimes I walk around with a quote that I chew on as I in a meeting. I'm like fully focused, but like in between, and I'm going for a walk or something, like I'll be like chewing on like something that Marcus Aurelius said or someone else said, or how can I better impact your life with it. But so how is Stoicism living in your life right now? A 2,000-year-old philosophy.
So I read at least a small paragraph or a page or even a book within Meditations every morning. And Ryan Holiday, who is arguably my favorite, or certainly one of my favorite authors, which is basically the most modern reviver of Stoicism today, has created a series of books that I encourage everyone to read. Still to this day, my favorite one is Stillness is the Way, or Stillness is the Key. Right now, I'm reading the most recent one that he released earlier in September of this year, actually. Discipline is Destiny, and it's excellent. So what Stoicism has given me is there is one sentence that can be summed by everything that you can learn from Stoicism and Meditations and Marcus Aurelius and Zeno, who even started the school of Stoicism back in Greece. It's do the right thing. And I know that overly simplifies everything, but it comes back down to what Marcus Aurelius is constantly pushing, which is do the right thing. It's oversaid in Ryan Holiday's books, which is really the purpose of Stoicism, is teaching the human mind on what is doing the right thing. And doing the right thing is for mind, body, and spirit. And if you come into our office here, we have canvases on the walls. One of them happens to be do the right thing in big bold letters. And if you carry that one sentence with you, I mean, think about it, is literally applicable in every facet, aspect of your life. Like, there are certain cultures that are drastically different where, what they truly believe, and they would pass a lie detector test of what they believe is a right thing, may be horrifically the wrong thing in other cultures, right? I mean, so there's always going to be some level of that aspect, but there is a strong alignment of civilized cultures of what is doing the right thing versus not. And we all have that little demon inside of us, that little angel on our shoulder, that little devil on our shoulder. And it's up to us if we want to listen to that or not. But by doing the right thing and at least asking yourself the question, is this the right thing? With every choice that you have to make, it will make you a better person for doing so. And you can elaborate, and you've read Meditations and you've read Stoicism books, I'm sure. You could take it in many, many topics of life and really drill down and go down a rabbit hole, which is philosophy fundamentally. But doing the right thing is what I walk away with when it comes to Stoicism. And there's 4 key virtues that are represented by Stoicism, which is wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Those 4 key things. And Marcus Aurelius says, what could be better than these 4 virtues? And if you can live your life with wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, he would be shocked if you could find out anything that would be better than those 4 things, and implementing those things into life.
Mm-hmm. Is there do you have the Ryan Holiday Memento Mori coin? Are you like that far of a fan?
I have that, and I have the 4 Wisdom coin, and I have the Amor Fati coin all in my backpack. And actually, I'm such a lover of Ryan Holiday. We actually did a big project and hosted a conference at Texas Medical Center in early October of this year, 2022. And to plan and host that conference, we ended up having to go out to Houston in late August and then back out there for the actual conference in October. And we had a big partner that was situated in Austin. So we actually flew to Houston and drove out to Austin. And on the way between, much closer to Austin, but on the way between Houston and Austin is a town called Bastrop, Texas, which is roughly about 40 minutes east of Austin, about 2 hours west of Houston. And Bastrop, Texas is where Ryan Holiday's bookstore, The Painted Porch, is located. And I stopped there as a cheerleading tourist in August because I was so excited to go there, and I was very glad that I had to repeat the trip coming in October because I was going back to Houston in October for the conference and back out to Austin shortly after, and I stopped there again. And so I've been to Ryan Holiday's bookstore twice now, and it's called The Painted Porch, which is the English translation for where Stoicism actually started in Greece, which is called the Stoa Poliki or Pokili, which is Greek for the painted porch. So the direct translation, and so Stoa Pokili is the painted porch in Greek, which is where Stoicism started. And Ryan Holiday called his bookstore The Painted Porch, which I've been fortunate enough to go to twice and bought a couple signed books from him because I get a little bit fanboy and geeky when it comes to Ryan Holiday and Stoicism.
No, that's awesome. I know he had a library. I didn't know it was in Texas. I was really close to it. I used to live in Austin. I should have checked it out.
It's
Is the
Bastrop, Texas, right there.
do you wake up and meditate in the morning? Do you do the like think about death? Like, what are some of the practices you use?
I will say I did that for many, many years, and this past weekend I celebrated my firstborn, who's a gorgeous little boy's first birthday. So this past year of raising a baby boy and having my morning somewhat taken from me, and I'm slowly getting them back, but it's still a toss of a coin sometimes. Sometimes he wakes up a little early. Sometimes I actually get my mornings back. But I used to have a very methodical, disciplined, almost religious morning. I wake up at 4:30 every morning, and usually I'm either in the office at 7:30 or 8, and so usually that morning time is working and mentally preparing for the day. So I've gone through phases, to be honest with you. Sometimes it's praying, other times it's meditating for the various styles of meditation, which is sometimes clearing your mind, other times it's reflecting on things. Spending an hour being in mode of gratitude, thinking of everything possible, literally down to the molecular level of what you're gracious for, or sharing gratitude for, stretching, you name it. So yeah, my mornings are my sacred mornings, but and oftentimes spent reading as well. So it's a disciplined approach to starting my day. I'm a big morning person.
Hmm. All right, what are the current books you're reading? Well, I imagine you're only reading one at a time.
No, I used to be that way, and then my business partner and very good friend had taught me otherwise to try something, and now I've probably gone a little bit too overboard with it, where you have multiple books going on at once. Because if you're a consistent reader, there's just some days that you just want to wake up and learn something that you can put as an action item. And
Yeah.
if you're really deep into a novel, a fiction novel, maybe you just don't, maybe you feel a little bit more aggressive that day where you're just like, God, I want to learn something that I can put in action today. And, reading this love story or this, Marvel book is not going to really cut it for me today. Other times where it's like, man, I need a mental break, and maybe I just need to read fiction. I need to read a love story or whatever it may be. Rather than another self-help book or another business book or another leadership book. So there's this aspect of having multiple books going at once that are different themed. And so, right now I have Ryan Holiday's Discipline is Destiny going on. I have a book by Jason Calacanis called Angel, How to Invest in Technology Startups, Timeless Advice for an Angel Investor. I'm really trying to get more involved in angel investing this year and next year coming up. I'm an avid fly fisherman, so there's a book
Yeah, we
called
talked
The
about that. Yeah,
Optimist.
it's on my reading list.
Yeah, The
You told me
Optimist is
about it. Yeah.
excellent. It's great. I mean, it just basically breaks up a guy who's learning and always will be learning how to fly fish in various places of the world, and talking about the specific fish that he's targeting in those places, like the bonefish or the permit in Bahamas, or the bass in Wisconsin where you are in the lakes, or going down and doing trout fishing in Argentina, for example. So it's been very cool read, and I love my Saturday mornings of taking a few casts out there. So it's things like that I'm reading. And I've been recommended a few books that I'm also very excited about reading. The most recent one actually that I just started is actually called Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, which is ironic because as I'm talking to you about how scatterbrained I've been working on with these books, and raising a 1-year-old boy at this point, and building a business from scratch coming up on a year, called Lifeblood Capital. We started in January 1st, 2022, which is a contingency of our career that we've been in for the past 15 years. Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less, is simply hardcore focusing on really what is important, both personally and professionally, and learning how to say no. And the premise of the book is success breeds failure. And so there's these methodical ways of saying that you work so hard to achieve success, but once you achieve success opens up opportunities. And as you have to have the ability to choose between these opportunities and then go on to these opportunities ultimately start diluting the very reason that you became successful, thus causing failure from success. So it's an interesting concept that I'm reading right now, but there's also a YouTube video on it by the author, which is
Helen Hadsell was able to win any competition she took part in.
Trademark.
She was known as the contest queen.
Which is Greg McEwen. Essentialism.
I think we just got a taste of it.
Yeah, you did. Well, Essentialism, the disciplined pursuit of less by Greg McEwen. That's the one that you got to check out if you're interested in something. So
sweet. And what does happiness mean to you?
I actually try not to use the word, to be honest with you. I like the word content much more. I think happiness is completely fleeting, and it's not a destination. I should say happiness is a destination. It's not a sustainable emotion. And so, I don't like using the word, to be honest with you. And it's not because I'm a pessimist or some sort of dark, angry person. I'm not.
You're a stoic.
You're
a stoic.
I'm a stoic. I'm quite a happy
That's a stoic
person.
answer.
Yeah. But if you're going to ask me truly what is happiness, I would say spending time with my family and my son. I absolutely love my mornings with my son and waking him up and going fishing with them and all the other stuff, just watching him smile. So that's happiness. But other than that, I would say happiness is a destination of an emotion and not sustainable. So I'd rather be content and work on a very methodical, disciplined way of things that make me happy.
That makes sense. And what advice do you have for young people listening in? Like college students, leaving, looking for a job, whatever. When you were that age, looking back.
Just think about what you have in your life and think about where it comes from and who's responsible for making it happen for your life. And if a lot of it is responsible from coming from other people and not necessarily yourself, how would you feel if it was taken away? And what pressure does that put on yourself to being, first and foremost, gracious and showing gratitude for what you already have in your life versus what you don't have, and what more could you get? And also, what could you not take advantage of anymore? Or I should say, take for granted. I think we are living in a lot of time where youth, for the most part, culture takes a lot for granted. And I would say, knowing what you have control of sustaining in your life and creating for your life versus taking for granted what the world creates for you, it'll make you a better person. It'll make you a stronger person. And I would say, help people, put other people before yourself, stop being selfish. And I think if you put others before yourself and you're constantly working with a service mentality, you will be surprised at how, quote unquote, happier you are with not only yourself, but with your life, and also the fact that you have more purpose than simply indulging yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. And what is a problem that you're having that you need help with? Like, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a solvable problem.
Running and growing a business in its fullest capacity for the first time. I came from a firm where I had my own team and had my own clients, and I thought that I was running a business within a business, and there was a lot of back-end invisible operations that enabled me to do what I did that I took for granted because I simply didn't know what that took to be able to instill in terms of the back end operations that supported me. Not that I didn't want to learn, not that I wouldn't have been very happy to learn what that all meant, but I just didn't have access to learning what that all meant. And so starting something from a white sheet of paper and having to figure out really what the back end of a business entails, rather than being an employee that shows up every day and just, you put your head down and you do your function and you execute on what you're told to execute on, and then you go home and then, you wait until the next morning and do it all over again. There is a lot of things to do that involve putting in operations to run a successful business. And I have spent the past year learning it day in and day out, flying by the seat of my pants. And it's been an amazing adventure and journey learning all this. And I see the world especially the professional world, with drastically different eyes, and a lot more respect for entrepreneurs and business owners and people who run companies. And so I don't know if it's necessarily a problem, but it's understanding how I can successfully continuously grow my business and making sure that everyone in my business is taken care of. And ultimately, we are providing our mission statement to our industry, which is helping MedTech startups.
So it's quite broad, which is good, but is there a specific thing in particular that's poking you in the back of the head currently? An element that you don't know about, an element that you want to grow on. It could even be legal stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say making sure compensation structures and legal compliance with my company is just something that I wish I really didn't have to deal with. But it's a complete necessary evil and a big thing that you have to work and think through, just to have everything be okay, the T's crossed and the I's dotted.
So are you talking in terms of just making sure the contract's good, or in terms of what you guys are doing in house? What does that mean?
Yeah, just make it, and we're working through it right now. But yeah, it's making sure that contracts are all taken care of.
Okay.
Both the company's protected, the employees protected, and everyone's fairly compensated. Both where it makes sense for the business to keep its doors open because the business is having obviously enough revenue generation to pay for operations, but there's obviously the purpose of profits, in addition to having the company or the employees be fairly compensated, more than fairly compensated for their service to the company.
Okay. And so we covered a lot of subjects. And before I just ask you where do people can keep up with you, which will be in the show notes, is there something we didn't cover that you either think we should cover with our last few minutes, or that we just would like to cover real quick? Basically, do we miss anything?
Well, if you're a Stoic, then you're a forever student of life in the world. And I think there's so many topics that you can constantly cover. And I am genuinely interested in a lot of different things. In terms of what we didn't cover that I would like to say, I would say that if there's one thing that I'd like to share about myself that's of interest, is that I'm a wino. I love wine. I think wine is a more than just an alcoholic drink. It's a story. It's a geographic story. It's a historical story. It represents not only a good time, but a lot more to it. It's an art. It's a science, and it also brings people together. And I've traveled the world for wine. The most recent visit that I've had was I went to a conference in Malta a couple weeks ago, and I was able to visit the oldest winery on the island of Malta. The wine was absolutely exceptional. I got to also visit the vineyards. It's called Marsovin. So shout out to Marsovin winery. It's exceptional wine. And so, yeah, I would say I'm a wino, and I love wine for what it is, both superficially as well as incredibly dynamically.
So if you could recommend a wine and a story that comes with it, is there a place you travel to that had a wine, that had a story, that had history, that you can recommend to us. If it could be not as expensive, so more people can share in this journey. What would you recommend, and what story would you want them to be thinking about as they're drinking it?
Man, great question. So I proposed to my now wife in a region called Priorat, which is an hour south of Barcelona in Spain. I married my wife in a vineyard with a winery in Eastern Washington, 2.5 hours east of Seattle. And our honeymoon was doing 23 vineyards on both islands in New Zealand. And if my wife was answering this question, she would probably tell you that you have to go to New Zealand. And I would say the same thing. I mean, anyone who's been in New Zealand, it's God's country. It's an incredibly special place on the bottom of the world. And I have so many wine stories that I could tell you because I love it. And there's beautiful stories all over the world. I've drank wine in Japan and visited vineyards in China and done it in Australia. And I've had Indian wine at the oldest Indian restaurant in England. It's a wonderful, that's why I love it. It's a wonderful asset to give a good time with a lot of storytelling. So there is an island called Wine Island, which is right off of Auckland, and it's called Wahiki Island. It translates to Wine Island, Wahiki Island. And it's basically, imagine if I say France met Costa Rica, because there's a tropical component to it, but at the same time, there is this amazingly wine country feel to it. And you take a 30 to 40 minute ferry boat off of Auckland directly to Wahiki Island, and there's just a plethora of wineries. And the wine there is eclectic, from sparkling wine to orange wine to great exceptional whites, and then just these bold as well as light reds. And so I highly recommend Wahiki Island in New Zealand if I was going to tell you something to go to.
Sweet, yeah, I'll check it out. I knew Auckland's the northern little island, right?
Correct.
I mean, it's not little.
Yeah, it's not. No, it's not doable in a day on foot, but it's not huge. But I would say that,
it's like an okay size
Auckland
island.
is the big city in the Northern Island, and if you fly into Auckland and jump on a ferry, which is an obvious right in the harbor there, and you take it right over to Wahiki Island, you stay there. I mean, you can get lost there forever. It's absolutely stunning.
Sweet. And then where can people go to stay up to date with you?
I only have, so as active as I am on it, and if anyone's listening on or to this podcast that knows me already, that I am overly active on LinkedIn, and it is because it literally is my only social media. So if you want to reach me by email, it's Giovanni@lifebloodcapital.com. However, if you want to keep up with everything else, you can see me and find me on LinkedIn, where I will share my podcast, which is the MedTech Money Podcast, where we interview entrepreneurs in MedTech who have raised capital and investors who have deployed capital in MedTech, and we demystify that raising and investing capital in MedTech. That's the purpose of it. And then also just sharing up-to-date news of what's going on in MedTech, and also in a fun manner, trying to share valuable content along with my travels of which conferences I go to.
Thank you for joining us today with the Learn with Lowell show. Check us out at learnwithlowell.com. Anywhere podcasts can be found, subscribe. Tell me what you thought of this episode. Check us out on YouTube in particular. It's a new thing I'm doing. Timestamps and links are in the show notes. Thank you for coming, and I hope every one of you found something today that you're curious about to learn more about, and you'll go out and be curious and learn something new. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.